Hey guys, it's the Dark Master, and welcome back to the Kirby Right Back at Ya Retrospective. In today's installment of the Retrospective, we shall be covering episode 75, Fossil Fools, Part 1, or as it's known in the Japanese original, Dream of a Dinosaur Parade, Volume 1, or Part 1, depending on the translation source. So this episode was originally released in Japan on March 22nd, 2003 as the 75th episode, while the English dub done by the infamous 4Kids was released on October 9th, 2004, also as the 75th episode. Man, we're already 3/4 of the way done with this series. Time sure does fly. This is the series' fifth two-parter, and much like the last ones I've done, such as episode 35 and 36, the Kirby Derby Part 1 and Part 2, episode 41 and 42, Prediction Predicament Part 1 and 2, episode 45 and 46, Scare Tactics Part 1 and Part 2, and episode 52 and 53, Snack Attack Part 1 and Part 2, I will be reviewing both parts of these special as their own episode, while waiting until the second part to give my thoughts on the two-parter as a whole. I'm just doing that to be consistent with previous episodes, plus I think it flows better. And I think it's fitting that the first Kirby Right Back at Ya episode review after I finish my Trilobite series would be a dive into prehistory to a significant extent, but with that, let's start with the episode review proper, with the story. The episode opens to a shot of a dinosaur book being held by Tiff, and we already got some stuff to talk about. In the Japanese original, the book has the word dinosaur written on it. For some reason, 4Kids saw fit to airbrush this word out. Also, it should be said that the dinosaurs of this episode lack any feathers at all, and that their wrists are pronated in a way that they wouldn't in life. I'll discuss the nature of these inaccuracies later, but for now, I'll just say 4Kids censorship here is extremely stupid, as it's clean English, and really, there's no reason why you'd remove it. And we then see Tiff open the book as she explains that long ago the land was ruled by dinosaurs, and while they are beautiful art, if a bit outdated, the real issue comes from the dialogue, as she implies that creatures like pterosaurs and marine reptiles are dinosaurs, which they are not. I mean, you could make the argument that pterosaurs are not as bad of a mistake, as they are the close cousins to the dinosaurs. As such, is kind of an understandable mistake that she might make. Even less forgiving, though, is that she describes them as having ruled the season, shows a picture of ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs, which are not closely related to dinosaurs. Heck, they're not even archosaurs. As she continues her talking by saying that back then there was only jungles, which not technically true. There were also deserts and other such things, and cappies didn't even exist back then. The children are amazed. Spikehead points out that the long-necked one and wants to know what it is, and Tiff explains that it is a seismosaurus. Ira asks what the other one is. In the Japanese original, he calls it Gojira, but she corrects him and explains that it is a Tyrannosaurus rex. Kirby wanders away while they do this and picks up a lizard. In the Japanese original, he says the word Kirorina, which is Japanese for dinosaur. The 4Kids English dub changed this to Poyo, and frankly, I think it's a good thing. While I genuinely don't like the censorship 4Kids did, I think the less Kirby the baby speaks, the better. It just works better. Spikehead is somehow horrified of the lizards, as he thinks they are a dinosaur, even though it's tiny. Honey is also worried, but Tiff assures them that it's just a plain lizard, though she also incorrectly states that lizards are the same family as dinosaurs, which is just taxonomically absurd. Spikehead is awed while wonders if that's true, and Takori, in a rare bout of genius, says that's, a bunch of hooey. Tiff says that he's enthusiastic about dinosaurs, and Takori says her head should be examined until he flies right into the stony cliff. Tuff laughs at the pitiful state of the bird, while Tiff says that he's stuck. Kirby, one of the few times in the anime, he decides to inhale and float up to pull Takori loose. He does so, which also manages to cause the cliff sides to collapse, and to everyone's shock, a full dinosaur fort falls out in one piece, which no doubt will infuriate any of my fellow field workers who have to carefully remove fossils from the bone, but, it's a cartoon. Tiff walks up and explains that it's a complete giant dinosaur foot. Everyone, including Kirby, look on in awe as we cut to the jazzy intro. After the jazzy intro, we cut to later that day as we see a crowd of cabbies looking at the cliffside. We see various people digging at the side, including Tuff and Iroh. Spike and Honey take away the debris as Tiff wonders what they could find, as Curio says there could be a whole skeleton there, which would be a momentous discovery. Kirby continues to mine as crowds crowd round to the foot, while Takori tries to take credit of others' work. Sound familiar? Police Chief Bookums tries to get the crowd to calm down, but is pushed aside. Melman asks what the hubbub is, and the mayor explains the discovery and how it could be an economic boom for the town, as Biblio points out how it's already happening. We cut to Kawasaki selling dinosaur-themed sweet buns. Gotta love his ingenuity, but is cut off as Tuff calls out another discovery, which is, as Curio points out, a leg bone. Tiff points out that if they find more, they can rebuild an entire skeleton. Meanwhile, Kirby's still mining, and the cliff face, in response, collapses upon him. He barely dodges, and Tiff is, of course, deeply concerned for Kirby's well-being, but everyone is in shock as we see a ribcage of the dinosaur is revealed. We cut to a little while later as a chalk outline akin to a crime scene has been set up, and now we see an outline of the body skeleton. We see Samo comment on how they once roamed the places they live. Mabel says it's a scary thought, and then we see Dedede cut this off as he rolls up in his golden limousine. Escargoon tells him to get out of the way, while the king says that it's against the law to congest the traffic. In the Japanese original, he says how he's going to arrest some of them for rioting. Sheriff Bookums walks up and informs the two of the recent discovery by Tiff and the others of dinosaur bones. The king is a bit confused, but Escargoon advises him to take credit. Dedede goes into the carted-off area to see the dinosaurs, and Escargoon tries to explain to him that he doesn't get it as the crowds of Cappies laugh. Dedede demands an explanation as Escargoon explains that it's not a live dinosaur and points out the bone, which shocks the king, who demands an explanation. He asks if this means that there's nothing left of dinosaurs except bones, as Escargoon makes a snide comment on the king's ability to intelligent himself. The crowd mumble amongst themselves as Iroh points out that Kirby found the rib cage, as Tuff further explains that it was found in the cliffside right there, pointing to it as Takori petulantly whines that he found the first one. Determined to find his own, Dedede runs up to the side of the wall and starts hammering it with a pickaxe. Tiff tries to get him to stop as they are supposed to dig carefully, and Curio says that he could damage the specimen. The king pauses for a bit, but instead of doing anything to stop, the cliff collapses upon him, covering Dedede in sediment and causing fossil bones to fall out. 4Kids added a cartoonish bouncing sound effect, as we see all the bones not only not get permanently damaged beyond repair, but manage to land perfectly in place, astounding everyone. Tiff is amazed that it is a complete skeleton, which is astounding, frankly, as somebody who knows how hard it is to get fossils in the field, and Dedede gets out of the rubble and is amazed as he found something, while Curio says the king has done the work for them. Tiff tries to calm the egotism as he says that they would have found it anyway, but the king says that they were just too slow and laughs. The Kirby looks on in confusion as we cut to the next day, and Escargoon walks into the castle library and is shocked by Dedede reading, as he says the last thing he read was a coloring book. But he then sees that it is a dinosaur book and is a little more understanding. The king tells him to quit the snide remarks and bring more dinosaur books. In the English dub, Escargoon says, "Where's See Dino Run?" While in the Japanese original, he says textless books, right? This will have significance later on, but regardless, in both versions, he gets more books for the king. In the Japanese original, the books often have text on them, like Dinosaur, Mystery, and Life. 4Kids, for some reason, airbrushed all of this text out for the most part. And it's really weird, as such censorship is greatly confounding, and I am completely opposed to it. And there really isn't any reason to remove these words. They weren't misspelled, they are clean English, so it just seemed like a waste of time. The camera pans over to Tiff, Tuff, and Kirby, seen eavesdropping on the king. Tuff says the king is really into dinosaur stuff, while Tiff is shocked as he's never been interested in anything before. The king reads, and we cut to later on where he's sleeping, as the king dreams about him riding a giant theropod, which he commands to see others to see other dinosaurs like Stegosaurus, Apatosaurus, and Velociraptor. The T-Rex breathes fire as we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, Dedede tells it to attack a nearby Triceratops, which makes kaiju sounds for some reason. 4Kids remove this, and we cut to the T-Rex and Triceratops fighting. It's honestly a pretty bad removal, as it makes the scene a lot more stilted. Triceratops, in retaliation, breathes lightning on the T-Rex, which causes Dedede to fall off, as we cut to the real world, as in reality, Dedede rolls out of bed, sleep-talking to cheer on his dinosaur. We cut to the next day, as Escargoon is shocked to see Dedede now in an explorer outfit. And he says he's going on an expedition to find dinosaurs before the Cappies find it. Escargoon tries to ask how they will find one, and Dedede says they'll dig one up. Escargoon then says that they're extinct, which confuses the king, and Escargoon offers a snide reference based on a pop-up book and says that there is no dinosaurs anymore and that they all went extinct. The king laughs, and technically he's correct, as birds are dinosaurs, so thus they're not all gone, but for all intents and purposes they are. He says that Escargoon must be fibbing, and Escargoon says it's true, and tells the king to ask Tiff about it. Dedede, in shock again, agrees and goes to Tiff, bursting into a room while she's eating dinner. He asks her if dinosaurs are really all gone, and Tiff confirms that, saying that they went extinct millions of years ago. He asks Tuff for clarification, and he says Curio knows all about it. The king then leaves to Curio's museum for more info, as we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, he accuses Curio of letting dinosaurs go extinct, outright threatening to give him the death penalty. Curio is, of course, horrified. 4Kids, in an effort to remove such morbid illusions in what is another stupid case of censorship, sees him instead ask where the dinosaurs are at, / did they, go extinct. Curio, in both versions, tries to explain the multiple causes, including a great comment, but says that they're not sure. Remember, back then it wasn't as confirmed that it was an asteroid. Dedede asks if some may have survived, and Kira says it's impossible. Dedede cries as he realizes they're all gone and runs off crying, as he wonders how they could, let all those small innocent dinosaurs go extinct, and says the others must be lying. We cut to Capitan, where we see Gengu, Tuggle, and Gus are discussing the end of the dinosaurs. Tuggle says that he believes in the comet theory, whereas Gengu says that they must have run out of food. Gus says he's just happy they're gone, only to get whacked in the head by Dedede. He and the others then flee for their lives, as Dedede explains that he'll prove the dinosaurs still exist to all the unbelieving Cappies. We then cut to a transmission from Channel Dedede, where the king promotes pro-dino propaganda, such as pointing it to a picture of the supposed plesiosaur Messi in Loch Ness, which, is a reference to Nessie from Loch Ness. In fact, the 4Kids English dub changed this to a more explicit Loch Ness monster reference. I honestly prefer the Japanese original, as it seems more consistent with the universe, while the Nessie version just is a blatant reference to the real world. Kawasaki, the mayor, and police chief Bookums look at this and laugh at the pure silliness of it. We cut to Biblio's bookstore where we see there are tons of these dino books the king gave him, yet not a single one is sold. Interestingly, 4Kids did not remove the text from these, though I guess it just makes sense as it was a lot hard, but it makes you wonder why they removed all the text from the other books. When Tiff reads the book, what she says is where we see the next change between versions. As she looks up on a bunch of poor photoshops. In the Japanese original, it has her say that the king wrote that dinosaurs are alive because he saw them in a dream, while the English dub alters it to him saying that while others say they went extinct, the proof is in the pictures. Both refine and convey the king's absurdity and coping mechanisms. It's also worth to point out that the poster behind Biblio has a reference to Happy Potter, which is an allusion to episode 38, a novel approach, which I've reviewed already if you'd like to learn more, and it'll be relevant later. The two laugh at this absurd book. We cut to the next day as Kawasaki takes out the trash, only to fall into a massive footprint, much to his chagrin, as we see the footprints lead out of town, as Kirby, Tiff, Tuff, the mayor, police chief Bookums, and Chef Kawasaki follow it to investigate. The chef asks if they're real, while Kiro says it's scientifically impossible. Tiff tells them to hush as the group peers out of a bush to see that it is a hoax done by Dedede, who uses a massive contraption to make massive footprints in what is probably the most ineffective of any method to fake dinosaur footprints, using waddle dees to lift up a heavy concrete slab, which then is released to create prints. This leaves them exhausted. Dedede tells them to stop being lazy, but Tiff calls him out as they are caught red-handed. The mayor shames the king for attempting to trick the town, while Kirio is bemused that they thought that this could possibly work. Dedede tells them to be quiet, and that the naysayers should shut up, and he's making his own proof, while Kirby just looks on this whole situation utterly confused. We then cut to an outside shot of the castle as the king demands a monster dinosaur from enemy. The enemy sales guy says that they've been out of stock for 65 million years. Actually, recent evidence suggests that 6 million years is more accurate, but regardless, the king rejects this, as Escargoon asks if they have one or not, as they may have to shop elsewhere. The enemy sales guy again says that he can't help them. Dedede explains that he wants to prove Cappy's wrong. This gets the enemy sales guy to send over the character of the week via the monster delivery system, Dr. Moro. Let's talk about him now. So Dr. Moro is an older scientist who, in terms of design, I think is okay. I like the hairstyle and glasses, sort of reminds me of something from the 1970s, but nothing to write home about. The performance in both versions is really decent. The Japanese voice done by Hiroshi Naka, a Japanese voice actor who also did Sir Loins from El Hazard, is very wonderful and subtle but analytical. The English dub by Darren Dunstan is, however, better and subdued, more in line with what I would expect from a scientist. And if you don't know who Darren is, he also did Splinter in the 2003 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And yes, hearing the name might be familiar to you, as Dr. Moreau is an allusion to Dr. Moreau, the antagonistic of the novel The Island of Dr. Moreau, which was a pioneer in science fiction and was adapted into several different movies, some better than others. I've never really read the novel or really watched the movies, but I don't think you have to in order to enjoy this two-parter, as I watched it before I even had done any of that, so yeah, I think you can still enjoy it, though if you have read the novel or watched it in the movies, you might have an idea of what is about to happen, but spoilers, so let us continue. Dr. Moro is introduced by the enemy sales guy as a specialist before leaving them to talk. Dedede asks if he can teach them to make a dinosaur. And Dr. Moro explains that they will first have to make a state-of-the-art laboratory, then pay an exorbitant fee. The king agrees to this and asks for what else Dr. Moro needs, and he says he'll need a brilliant lab assistant. The two goobers, of course, apply, but Dr. Moreau is rightfully skeptical and has them tested. He first asks them what is 1 plus 1. Both get it wrong horribly. He then asks where rain comes from. In the Japanese original, Dedede says bird poop. Kinda gross, while 4Kids altered this to the king saying wet. While the last questions are completely changed between versions. In the Japanese original, he asks who is the dumbest person in the world, to which the answer given by Escargoon is Dedede, and the final question of them is who is the second dumbest person, which Dedede answers Escargoon. In the English dub by 4Kids, he asks them to identify CO2. Escargoon says she's a singer. And the fourth question is, where do gases come from? Which Dedede answers Escargoon. Honestly, this change sort of leaves me conflicted. The English dub seems more like a genuine, if basic questions a scientist would make someone answer, but the Japanese version serves to hint at the subtle cruelty Dr. Moro will display as the two-parter goes on. Both versions are fine, so you're free to decide which one you like more. In either version, he decides against using the two goobers, and Dedede assures him that there is someone who is perfect. We cut to Tiff, who is amazed that the Kappa kids are done excavating. The kids explain that it's boring, with them just digging, as Iro asks who cares about old bones, as he wants to see a living dinosaur. Tiff says that since there are no more dinosaurs around, these fossil bones are the next best thing, as by studying them, they can learn about animals long lost. The Kappa kids look confused, and Spikehead says who cares as he and the others leave to go home. Tiff is saddened, but then Dr. Moreau shows up, and he says that people don't appreciate science, as people want to see real dinosaurs and not look at old bones, saying that what if they could be seen via the power of science? Curio is bamboozled, and Tiff asks who this stranger is. Dr. Moreau introduces himself, and here we see a small error created due to a change between versions. In the English dub, he claims to have a lab in the castle, despite it really being located in Baba Ahara jungle, which is an untamed wilderness last seen in episode 18, Flower Power, which I reviewed before and is an allusion to the Akirigahara forest in Honshu, Japan, also called the Sea of Trees. The Japanese original has no such reference, and as such, the continuity error doesn't exist, so really, blame 4Kids for this one. Dr. Moreau explains that he came to Dreamland upon hearing of their great discovery. Tuff is confused as to why he's there, as he explains the king wants to see dinosaurs, and that's why he made a lab nearby. Tiff asks if they can visit his lab, and the group go to the lab, which looks like a big and impressive sort of office building. They then go inside to this highly technologically advanced building, but see Dedede and Escargoon are harassing some poor lizard, gluing on horns and frills. This is actually a subtle allusion to the practice known as slurposaurs, which is a practice seen in a lot of old movies set in the past, where people would glue sort of these extra pieces onto live animals and sort of rotoscope them into an area where they could, fight caveman stuff. Not really scientifically accurate, but it's still impressive in terms of the special effects. Dr. Moreau is greatly annoyed as they are not toys. In the Japanese original, Escargoon says to Dedede, "See, you got scorned." In the English dub, he says they were just having a little fun, Doc. The Japanese version, I think, is better here, as it shows that Escargoon is more self-aware than the king. Dedede sarcastically asks if they are tired of finding old bones. Tiff, horrified, asks if they are doing research with the doctor, and Escargoon says that they'll tell her nothing. The king claims, "Who needs research when you can make their own dinosaurs?" and runs off, laughing like a buffoon. Dr. Moro rightfully points out that it's better that they're gone as they can work better, and they should be able to sufficiently get along with the process without them. Tiff is happy to help and the others happy to observe. Dr. Moreau activates a computer as he explains that enough modification of DNA, you can take a lizard and turn it into anything, dramatically. We see a dinosaur, but also references to the monkey from episode 41, War of the Woods, which I've reviewed before, Narf, a character seen in Kirby's Dream Land 3, and a giant cobra from episode 18, though recolored green. Tiff is amazed and asks if it's true he can do it. Dr. Moreau says yes, and that producing a dinosaur is merely scientific. Curio is astounded that it's not impossible, while Tuff says it's amazing, and Tiff hesitates, saying that she thinks it feels wrong to mess with nature like this, and her brother is disappointed as Curio asks if she wants to learn about dinosaurs. Tiff relents but says that they must be careful. Dr. Moreau agrees, saying that they can never be too careful. He asks who Kirby is, and Tuff introduces him and tells them it's time to begin, as Dr. Moreau is ready. We cut to a shot in the nearby jungle as we see Kirby and the others trying to catch lizards, akin to the beginning of the episode. It's hard to be certain, but given their green coloration and how this area is inspired by Japan, I'm willing to bet that they are meant to be the Japanese long-tailed lizard, Tachydromus sexlinatus. Tuff and Kirby struggle a bit as they are slippery little creatures, but eventually both catch them in their own special ways. We then cut to the lab where Curio, Tiff, and Dr. Moreau are working, as he says that they must look at the progress of each individual injected cells. And Tiff pulls up an image of cells replicating, and Curio says the eggs will be ready in no time. Tiff yells in shock as lizards crawl on her. Tiff is rightfully angry when it's revealed that Tuff and Kirby let out some of those lizards, but Dr. Moreau says that should be plenty, while Tiff explains to Kirby that this is serious, as we see that the King and Escargoon are watching them via cameras. The two comment on how they are doing the hard work for them, and they laugh in evil ways. Soon the eggs are ready, to the amazement of everyone. Dr. Moreau says that they should start hatching soon, and the group are excited. Cutting to the next night, we see Tiff and the others are sleeping in the lab. There is a glass shattering sound effect as Tiff, Curio, Tuff, and Kirby all wake up. In the Japanese original, they say what, including Kirby partially. The English dub has them gasp, while Kirby just says Poyo. And honestly, that's a good thing, as the less Kirby talks, the better, in my humble opinion, as I always viewed him as mostly being mute or babyish. You could say this is one of the few changes that 4Kids did that is usually good. They turn on the lights and see the eggs have all been stolen. Curio and others are appalled. We then cut to a broadcast from channel Dedede as Escargoon announces Dino Kingdom. Interestingly, in the Japanese original, it was called a dinosaur park, but this name was never mentioned, as 4Kids, for some unjustified reasons, thought that they could be sued by the owners of Jurassic Park, which is honestly very far-fetched for an episode of an obscure Kirby anime, whose usage falls well within the parody fair use protections. Sir Ibram and Ladylike are watching this broadcast, and here you see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, Sir Ibram says it's a dinosaur theme park, and Ladylike mentions that there was a movie like this, which is a far more direct allusion to the 1993 movie Jurassic Park by Steven Hillenburg. This was removed for similar reasons that are, clearly silly, like copyright infringement. The English dub just has them say that it's a bunch of boulder dash. Dedede in the broadcast continues as he has dino toys in front of him and continues saying that it's real life dinosaurs. The mayor's wife asks how this is possible, while her husband says it must be another hoax. Escargoon conveniently says that it's no hoax, and we see Dedede say that thanks to his team that they have now brought dinosaurs back here again. We see another change between versions. In the Japanese original, he cites Tiff and her team, which gets Kawasaki interested. The English dub has Dedede not mention Tiff at all, and Kawasaki only says that it will resurrect his business. I think either version are fine, but Gus is skeptical in both versions, and the two goobers make dino puns as the commercial ends. Iroh says that he wants to go, with his father passing it off to his wife to decide. As we cut to that night, as she crowds of campies enter into the park. The sign is, of course, changed to say Dino Kingdom, and we get several sets of panning shots of the park as you see a bunch of crowds. In the Japanese original, this scene is slightly longer, with an additional shots of Melman the Mailman and Campy Kids buying some cheap but kind of neat looking dino themed merchandise. We cut to Tiff and the others talking to Bookums about how the eggs were stolen. Tiff says that even Dr. Moro disappeared and claims that it must be a plot by Dedede. Bookums says it is fishy, while the mayor wonders what will happen. Tiff says they must get the eggs back, as otherwise bad stuff may happen. We cut to the crowd as Dedede makes an announcement that regarding the dinosaur kingdom. Tiff says he stole credit, as Tuff demands they admit that they did a crime. Dedede tells them to stop yapping and for everyone to get ready as they are about to go on an adventure. They run away to get on the boat, skipping the line. The others who waited in line complain about that, to which the king correctly points out how he owns the place. The king tells them to climb aboard as they set off. As they go under the sign entrance to the park, we see the final change between versions. In the Japanese original, the sign is clearly visible. For kids, instead of simply altering the sign, which admittedly they did do for a few shots, instead, for this specific scene when they're going under it, made the sky darker and shifted it up so you don't really see it as much. They make their way through the swamp as Escargoon explains that the vegetation is meant to be ancient, and Dedede compliments on how realistic it captures the feeling of an ancient time period. Tuff is bitter about how their work was stolen to fill some park, and Kyo says that no real science is respected here. Dedede whispers to Escargoon that he hopes everything is ready, as we see him bring out some snacks that make Kirby happy at the very least. A loud noise ahead as they go down the river scares some of the children, and Dedede chuckles and activates/flips a switch as Kirby notices a cage of sheep to rise up. The others look on in horror as the mayor protests this, as this is his sheep. His wife demands an explanation as Dedede explains that he's laid out to the bait. Tiff is a bit confused but stops as she and Kirby notice their drink shaking. Tuff asks what is going on as the ground shakes, and we get glimpses of some large theropod which then consumes the sheep and flings the now empty cage into the river. We get a good look at it, and it's none other than D-Rex, which is an abomination of a theropod with the face and colors of Dedede. Normally I'd go into detail on this monster, but I figure that much like with the two-parter, I should wait to discuss this until I review part 2, as there the nature of it is revealed. This horrifies everyone, though Dedede says it looks familiar, and he starts up the boat, with the dinosaur chasing after them along the riverbank. It lunges for a kill, and the crew look horrified. Kirby is just kind of concerned and looks up there as the episode ends with D-Rex eating the camera. And this is the first two-parter not to end with some, narrator doing a little bit of narration. And honestly, this was a good decision, as I think it would have dampened the cliffhanger to have some random guy start talking. Now that we've covered the plot, let us discuss the positives, negatives, and my final thoughts on this episode. Starting with the positives, I thought that Dedede was really engaging in this episode. Normally, he's someone who's not at all interested in science. He quickly engages in reading about a subject that actually interests him, and he becomes really engaged and shows that he is a little more intelligent than we often see him to be, even if he is still a little stupid. And it's honestly interesting to see him interested in something of this nature. His attempts to prove his theory that dinosaurs still exist, while sort of invoking the David Peters type creationist thinking, as well as, mentioning the Loch Ness Monster, I do feel was filled with genuineness. Like, he really wanted dinosaurs to still exist. And I mean, technically they do, but, non-avian ones are the ones we're talking about. Tiff is a lot more cautious and is another highlight as she appreciates dinosaurs as they are, skeletons, and is much more grounded in her appreciation, but offers a still valid interpretation of the concept of loving paleontology. Dr. Moreau, despite a somewhat admittedly kind of forgettable design, was also very engaging, as him being more reliant on intelligence than other monsters or people in service to enemy, using science and appeals to knowledge to get what he needs, independent of the king. Speaking of, let's talk about the major theme of this episode, paleontology. Now, if you know me, I love paleontology. I've made a whole video series on trilobites and the evolution of elephants, not to mention an extinct invertebrate iceberg, so I've always loved this episode and its theme, even before I went about reviewing it. The ancient world is a great concept, and while, yeah, at the beginning of this review, I pointed out a few things that were inaccurate, and indeed, this episode definitely, strays from what we currently know about dinosaurs. Unlike some highly untalented paleotubers like Scanova, I understand context and nuance. You see, this anime was made at the beginning of the 2000s. At the time, concepts such as feathers on dinosaurs were still very niche, let alone whether wrists were pronate or not. And pterosaurs slash marine reptiles were often lumped together as being dinosaur adjacent. And while taxonomically they're not, that is an understandable mistake for the time. And of course, there were some mistakes that I do feel are less forgivable, like Tiff saying that dinosaurs are part of the lizard family, even though there's no such thing as a lizard family. I would also point out that she also points out that they're related to birds, which is, kind of niche at the time. Plus, let us be freaking clear here. Dreamland is not meant to be a one-to-one equivalent of our world, and as such, it doesn't even have humans. So it's very likely that the dinosaurs in the context of Dreamland would have a completely different taxonomy and evolutionary origin, as well as relatives, than ours do. And you could counter that by saying, well, they have Latin names. Well, Latin names, I mean, the characters speak English even though they're on an alien planet, so I don't really think the presence of a Latin name being similar to one that we have would necessarily prove that they're meant to be the same thing. Honestly, I think people are getting a little too into the weeds because they get really angry in these sorts of things, but you gotta keep in mind this is a completely different setting, plus it is an animated children's show, and it's not meant to be educational like, say, Walking with Dinosaurs. And as such, these sort of mistakes slash misconceptions are understandable, and honestly, it seems more like pedantic, petulant whining than anything substantive to point out. Another negative I've heard other people talk about that I disagree with is how some say the king reading here is inconsistent with episode 38, a novel approach where he can't read. But here's the thing, while yes, this show is largely episodic, and I do consider that a flaw, this was over 30 episodes later, and the show does have a loose, if consistent, passage of time, and I think it's fairly reasonable that following his embarrassment at the hands of that context episode, he would have likely learned how to read. However, I think now it's time to get into some of the actual negatives that I do think are valid. For one, all the censorship/removal of scenes I just think was silly and unneeded, and I find censorship personally abhorrent. Outside of Kirby speaking less, which was admittedly a decent thing to do, I also have to admit, even though this is my favorite of the two-parters, it can be a little slow at first, but I think there's enough to keep you engaged, even if you're not as big of a fan of this episode. Overall, I'd say that it's not 100% perfect, but it is definitely in the top 5 for me, and I think that you should absolutely watch it. It's a must watch. You'll definitely enjoy it. Though I also recommend going ahead and watching part 2 immediately after to get the most of this. But I'll save my thoughts on part 2 and the two-parter as a whole until I review that. So, regardless, in conclusion, this is an amazing episode and honestly one of my favorites in the entire series. Well worth a watch. I'm the Dark Master, and if you liked the video, liked it. But if you love it, consider subscribing and share around. And join me next time on the Kirby Right Back at Ya Retrospective. Take care and have a wonderful day.